This is lesson 3 of a series entitled Dare to Be Your Real Self. And the subtitle of today's lesson is Out of the Darkness into the Light. It's only common sense to say and believe that we have a higher self and a lower self, a self of light and a self of darkness, because we do. Our primary responsibility in this life is to understand what I've just said and to transform our identity, to transform our allegiance from our lower self to our higher self. This is a natural process. There's nothing wrong with our lower self except that it's the part of us that causes all the trouble, the pain, the anguish, the heartache, the suffering. But it's the natural order of things. It's an experience that we have to go through. And we can stay in that self of us as long as we wish. And we usually stay there until we have suffered deeply enough and long enough. A Chinese philosopher who lived many hundreds of years ago said, "The sages do not consider that making no mistakes is a blessing." Did you grow up thinking that, or were you told that life was to learn how to not make mistakes? You probably thought that you dare not make a mistake. Well, the making of no mistakes is not a blessing. They believe rather that the great value of man lies in his ability to correct his mistakes and continually to make a new person of himself. I can remember when I came to believe that the mistake was not the problem, that getting caught was the problem. And so I began to spend my life not getting caught. The heck with a mistake, I knew I was going to make them. I gave up on that end of it. I never used my mistakes to find out, to discover me from them, but I began to protect myself from my mistakes. Are you following my drift? Are we living in the same planet? And so my denial was that I didn't make a mistake even if you saw me do it. I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong. Well, you cannot be a part of this human mechanism that we are without the making of mistakes. And it is in this process that we begin to discover who we really are, or rather who we really are not. I suppose that another subtitle for this lesson would be, Check Your Shadow. One of the great insights into human nature is Jung's shadow self. Our shadow self is that part of us that is unattractive, unwanted, inadequate, and is not at all a reflection of our real self. It is the antithesis of our real self. It is the self that we have made. It's a concoction of ideas and impressions and labels and thoughts and feelings. But it's not real. It's not permanent. But we are expert in projecting our shadow selves onto others, and others are expert at projecting their shadow selves on us. You know, lots of times we have fallen in love with a person's real self. There in the midst of their shadow self, we saw something that was real and said, ah. And they looked through us and saw something that was real. And so our real selves fell in love with each other. And then we started walking hand in hand into the fading sunset, only to discover that the hand I'm holding is the shadow self of someone else. We thought the real self was what we were going to get. Isn't that true? And they thought that our real self was what they were going to get. Not so. Not so. Because our identity mostly has to do with our unreal self. This is why the scriptures say that we live in darkness. And sometimes the reference is to a deep darkness, but the promise is that there will be light. And the light, of course, will come when we discover and experience who we really are, who we already are. The best time to study human nature is when nobody else is present. And I say that because there's a tendency for us to want to study human nature, meaning them. Right? The only human nature that you can ever study and understand and grow with is when you begin to study your own nature. As you and I begin to understand ourselves, then we will understand the people in the world around us. And so in the beginning, perhaps we have to study human nature with no one else around, but the time comes when we have to study ourselves in the midst of others in this world around us. We have to begin to observe ourselves and to watch ourselves very closely. I'll be talking more about that before this lesson is over this evening. But this is one of the most difficult things in the world to do, to see and to observe and to list one's own faults. And few of us can be honest enough with ourselves or have insight enough to pursue this process at any depth. The reason, of course, is that we fear our weaknesses, and the mind itself constructs defenses, barriers against our becoming aware of our defects, of our shortcomings. These defenses or barriers are what we call denial. Denial is the mind's unwillingness to observe itself. Now, most of us are aware that certain of our actions are irrational, and that we justify ourselves and our actions by blaming other persons. Have you ever caught yourself acting irrationally? Your voice raised in the telephone conversation, storming out of the house, slamming the door, doing something that if someone else did it, it would not only be absurd, but it would be sick. Have you seen that in yourself? But what do you do immediately? You say it was their fault. You would not have done that if someone else had not done what they did. Is that true? Huh. No, it's not true. It was what happened. You see, this keeps us from seeing our own faults clearly. We're always justifying ourselves, and so we never can see ourselves. We have very good reasons why we're the way we are, and we have very good reasons why we blame other persons for being the way they are, even if they're like us. Strange, but that's the way it is. Perhaps nothing is more humbling than deliberately trying to understand our own weaknesses. But there's also nothing more profitable. You cannot do anything more profitable than to begin to observe yourself. It is the most exciting and rewarding game in town. And not one person in 10,000 will do it. If you will do it, I promise you that the changes that will take place, automatically take place, will astonish you, will amaze you, will transform you, and will cause you to become in time a new creation, a new creature. And that is a promise not that I make, but that has been made from the beginning of time. One of the best ways to observe ourselves is to observe our irrational behavior and then look for the reasons. Look within ourselves, no longer looking at outside sources for the cause, but looking within ourselves and to become willing to do something about ourselves. Now, you've been doing this, I hope. Remember last lesson, your assignment was to take a searching and fearless inventory of yourself and to admit to God and to yourself and to another human being the exact nature of what you found. And that took a little skin off right there, didn't it? And become entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character and to ask God to do so. That was your assignment last week. And you would just be astonished at some of the stories that people have told me already this week about phenomenal things that have happened to them as a result of just beginning to go into action. One of the great discoveries of the 20th century is that spiritual principles will solve all our problems. It's a fact. Spiritual principles, the practicing of spiritual principles, will solve all our problems. This truth has been known and practiced and taught and passed down through the ages, but only a few have believed it. This is what the scriptures mean when it is said that many are called, but few respond, few answer. Everyone is called into this new way of thinking. This new way of thinking. All the problems known to humankind are the result of not understanding and therefore not practicing spiritual principles. Every problem that exists in the world. But all of your problems and my problems originate from this same source, from this same lack. We want someone or something, some government or some religion, to save us from ourselves. And there's no one that can save us from ourselves but us. No one. We're the only one that can do that. Carl Jaspers said, it is not enough to find new institutions. We must change ourselves, our characters, and our moral spiritual wills. Whoever goes on living as before has not grasped the menace. The change can come only in every person's manner of living. Every little act, every word, every attitude in millions and billions of people matter. Do you believe that's true? That everything that the human race thinks, feels matters? Do you believe that? Then that means that we believe that every thought we think matters. Every action matters. Everything that we have done and everything that we do matters. Everything. And we cannot get where we want to go on this planet, in this life, or beyond this life, until we assume total responsibility within ourselves for how we think and feel, for what we see, and for what we do. There's no other way. There's no other way. Now, we have heard this, but most of us have not come to terms. It has become information. And one of the things that we have incorrectly understood is that we have believed that information would save us. Go back to your days in school. You got a lot of information and passed the tests. Went to the next class. Accumulated enough information, you passed the test. Went to the next class. Graduated from high school, went to college, got a lot of information, passed the course, went to the next class, got a lot of information, went to the next course, passed the next class. But none of the information that you got was ever acted on. It was stored, accumulated knowledge, and maybe you still remember Trees by Joyce Kilmer, or something like that. But most of that information was only accumulated. You see, no one ever told us that we had to do what we know or it doesn't count. And spiritual principles cannot be practiced simply because we know them. We must do them. We must practice these principles in all of our affairs. Now, in these first two lessons, a system of spiritual principles that is ancient, goes back thousands of years, has been given over and over to the human race, has been recommended to you. If these principles are practiced, they're guaranteed to move us, every one of us, out of the darkness, out of our dark selves, into the light. They must be practiced. Not just learned, not just discussed at meetings or read, but practiced. Practiced. Practiced, practiced, practiced. I wish I could say that word 10,000 times in the next 2 seconds so that your mind would just go boing. Practiced. In these first 2 weeks, you've been hearing about and working with the first 7 steps of the 12 steps of the Tao, or the Way. And one of the things that we have come to see is that the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. which means to practice it. Now, listen to a statement, a couple of paragraphs from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It talks about the promises. It's speaking to every person. It has nothing to do with a particular addiction, but it has to do with a spiritual reality. And it is speaking to a person who has just been through the first 7 steps. If we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. A new freedom? Yes, because we will begin to experience new dimensions of consciousness, new awareness, a new way of thinking and feeling. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Aren't these incredible promises? Fear of people. Now, I know that there's no one here that experiences very much fear. Right? Wrong. We live in a fear-filled society. There was a time in my life when I had the worst job I ever had in my life, which was selling used cars for a crooked automobile dealer. And every time somebody came on the lot, I ran behind the little shack and hid. I was afraid of people. But could I admit that I was afraid of people? No way. Absolutely not. I was afraid of people. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Intuitively know. Amazing. You'll automatically, intuitively know how to handle things so that you don't have to react, be angered, but just know. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Now that is an amazing promise. It is too good to be true, isn't it? Come on, admit it. Let's don't bother with this stuff because that's too. God will become an active force in our lives? Who are you kidding? That's not going to happen until some other time. It really is what it means. If we really believed that we had the key to opening a state of consciousness in which and from which God would be doing things for us that we could not do for ourselves, would I become willing to take a few little steps, practice them? You better believe I would. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They're being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them, if we will practice these principles in all of our affairs. And the time came in my life when I believed that so completely as a result of being so devastated, discovering that my own values, that my own belief system was not functional at all, that I became willing to go to any lengths to. I believed that this system was a science. And I set out to become one who understood and who was an expert practitioner of that science. And I say that simply because it's true. I believed in it. I believed that it was the only way to have God be a presence and an experience in my life. And so I set out to practice these steps, and I did, and I continue to do so. Now this week we're up to step 8. Made a list of all the persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Sounds rather sickening, doesn't it? I mean, who in their right mind is going to make a list of all the people they've harmed? Well, remember, this step comes after the 7th step, which came after the 6th. In other words, the steps are progressive. One leads to the next, and they're not complete except that we take them and practice them as a whole. Now, up until now, I have been working with me, looking within me, seeing what I did not want to see. Now suddenly, in my inventory, I surely must have begun to see that I had harmed other persons. I have to make a list of them. What are the obstacles to making such a list? The reluctance to forgive is the number one obstacle. Why, if I harmed them, it really wasn't that serious. They should have known that my intentions were good. If I harmed them, by golly, I meant to. And I'm sorry I didn't harm them worse than that. Had another shot at it, I'd do it again. That's our self-righteousness that comes in. Then we don't have to do anything about it. But wait a second. These steps are for me, for my spiritual growth. There was also purposeful forgetting. When I started making my list, I found my mind wandering because there were certain names I did not wish to put down there because that meant that I'd have to go into action. And boy, that was going to really be embarrassing when I had to knock on someone's door and say the things I was going to have to say. But in order to be true to myself, I made a list that was as accurate and as complete as I could possibly make it. And it was a long list. I'll flat guarantee you that it was. And to become willing to make amends to them all of them. Well, there was one person that I was... I'll tell you about Garnet in a few moments. I just happened to think about a telephone call I received last week when I was thinking about this very lesson. It was from Chicago, someone that I'm sponsoring there, a young woman. She's a sponsee. And she called me to tell me that she was going, in the next few minutes, into the CEO's office, the company for which she works, to make her amends to him. Sounds good, right? She said, I'm going in to tell him what a horse's tail he is, so that he will understand that that's why I reacted the way I did yesterday. I said, wait a minute, Mary, that's not the way this works at all. You're going in to tell him how bad he is, and so that you did what you did because he was the way he was. I said, that's not making amends. I said, it won't work. I said, and I'm your sponsor, Mary. I said, what you do is you go in and without mentioning one thing that he has done, you tell him honestly, with great feeling, how sorry you are that you did what you did, that you were the way that you were. And she took a deep breath and she did it. She called me today to tell me with such excitement about the experience. It was one of the most exciting experiences of her life, what happened. Was. These principles work. I look back on my experience. The original one, when I went through that long list, calling some people on the telephone, writing letters to others, knocking on doors, having lunch, going over with each person, not always in detail, but honestly saying, I am so sorry that I have harmed you. I had to become willing to do that. And this step 9, made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. No exceptions, no cop-outs. Except when to do so would injure them or others. We cannot be transformed, we cannot be healed, we cannot be changed at another person's expense. So there's need for discretion. You do not inform the spouse of a former lover. You do not. You do not tell your own spouse about something that that person does not know about and is not prepared to handle. Your amend in that instance is the amending of your way of life, practicing certain things. It is sincere regret, but not guilt. You forgive yourself. But there are those persons that we have to go to and to speak to and to clear it away, to clear away the wreckage of the past, not for them, but for us. Now, if you want to be a normal human being, you don't have to do this. It's not required. You found no courses in college that required that you take this action. But readiness to take the consequences of our past and to take responsibility for the well-being of others is the spirit of step 9. I can tell you that is one of the most healing of all of the actions that we can take. How many people do you know? How many children, grown or whatever age, love to have a parent come, spend just 10 minutes saying how sorry they are that they fell short? Boy, I see some of you right now just about to cry, as I say. Wouldn't that change your life if they could? Of course it would. But how many have we children who need to go to our parents and say, I'm so sorry that I fell short. It was not your fault, it was mine. This crisscrossing of lives that we've all experienced requires that those who wish to be changed, that we speak to, we cannot ignore, we cannot walk away from, we cannot hide, we cannot conceal. Because while what we do will affect other persons, it is still our own responsibility to take this action ourselves. And I tell you that the person who will do it honestly and completely and with enthusiasm will find that your life will be changed. It will catapult you into the life of the Spirit. It will amaze you at what will happen. I mentioned Garnet a few minutes ago. He was on my list, and he was the one that was most difficult for me to decide that I would ever make my amends to him, because I spent a great deal of time planning his demise. I was going to fix him. I was going to fix him beyond repair. I was not going to repair him. I was going to fix him so he could not be repaired. And I felt like that when I did it, that I would get a standing ovation from the whole human race. If you get the idea that I didn't like him, and that those insane feelings were in me, it's correct. And so now I'm into my spiritual program, which requires that I become willing to make amends to Garnet without mentioning one thing that he's done to me. That is not fair. And so I didn't do it. I put him last, maybe never. Okay? So one day I'm riding along in my automobile, except it wasn't mine, it belonged to that owner of that cheap used car lot. My life was changing, but it hadn't changed that much yet. And I'm riding along, and I tell you, I felt so good I could hardly stand it. And this voice spoke to me. Now, voices speaking to people, trust me, did. And I've got this big smile on my face, and this voice said, you're not going to grow another inch until you forgive Garnet. And it was God's speech. I'd heard this voice before. And I said, I'm not going to do it. I just about drove the car off the road. I'm not going to forgive Garnet. And the voice said, yes, you will. And I said, no, I won't. Then the voice said, well, the forgiveness is for you. It's not for Garnet. And I said some other things. And then I said, nobody can forgive Garnet. And the voice said, well, I have. And I said, well, and this was my last argument, I would if I could. Now, doesn't that sound noble? I would do it if I can. And the voice said, I'll show you how. And instantly there came into my mind a picture of me holding my young son, Alan, who was only 2 years old at that time. And Alan was a love. Holding him in my arms and loving him. And loving him so much I could hardly stand it. And then switching it to Garnet. And I switched the love to Garnet and it quit, just like that. Pow. And I said, see, it won't work. And the voice said, keep trying. It will work. And I kept practicing it because these steps were important to me. And one day it worked. Really worked. Really worked. Not long after that, I was driving along in that old car. And it was the new cars had just come out. And I'm on a 4-lane highway. And I look over to my left, and passing me is a new Oldsmobile or Buick, I don't remember, but it was a beautiful two-tone brown that I recall. It was a beautiful car, and when you're driving an old junker, it looked even more beautiful. And as I looked over, you'll never guess who was driving the car. was Garnet. And instantly, I loved him. Instantly, I was glad that he had it. And I just broke up because I'm telling you that the principles work. Not long after that, I went to Garnet and I made my amends to him without even the desire to mention one of the things that he had done to me, because I had forgiven him. They no longer existed in me. Blame as the result of these steps, as the result of the grace of God working in my life. And then a short time later, Garnet died. Suppose I had missed that opportunity. Suppose. I am so grateful. I am so very grateful. Let me tell you another amends-making story. When you make your list of people you have harmed, you're going to be amazed, just absolutely, it's going to blow you away at how they will come in view. You make your list, and you're going to get some opportunities that you may not relish at the time. Shortly after I made my list, I discovered, and I don't remember how, that a former executive of a national corporation that I had worked for was in town. And he'd been my boss. And I really didn't want to go see him, but the program required that I do so. So, sort of biting my fingernails on the way over to the hotel where he was staying to see him, I stopped off to see a couple of friends, have a cup of coffee, and they suggested that I might not want to do this. They said it's not necessary. And I heard my mind about to agree with them, and I said, no, I've got to go. This is my program of transformation. So I went, and from the lobby, from a house phone, I dialed his room, and Ray Hess answered the phone, and I said, this is Jack Boland, and he was about to hang up, and I said, wait, Ray, don't hang up. And I said, I really am doing something about my life, and I need 2 minutes of your time. I'd like to make my amends to you. There was a pause. He said, okay, come on up. And I got off of the elevator on his floor and walked down the corridor. When I got to his room, he was standing looking at his watch like this, 1 foot in the hallway, 1 foot in his room. 2 minutes. We spent about an hour and a half. I told him how sorry I was, but asked him to forgive me. And I told him that I would go to any lengths to correct the things that I had done that had caused him such anguish and inconvenience when I worked for the company. And I can't tell you what a sweet experience it was. But that wasn't the end of it. You see, when you're practicing spiritual principles, there never is an end to them. They go on and on and on and on. This was early on in my practicing. He was one of the first persons that I got to. Months passed. I grew in strength. My desire, my need to be back really in the professional world in which I had lived in the past came. And I set some goals and dreamed some dreams and prayed some prayers and believed what I knew in my heart that I'd be at the right place at the right time to have the experiences that I sought. And one day my life had changed. I was selling new cars. On the showroom floor, and the phone rang, and this voice said, my name is John Mosley. You don't know me, but I know you. And he said, I would like to offer you a job. Can we have lunch together today? And I said, we sure can. And I met him at Hotel Roanoke. He told me an interesting story. He was a regional representative for one of America's largest pharmaceutical houses. He said, I have been to Roanoke 3 times. This is the 3rd time to find someone to take over this territory. It's one of our most important territories. I haven't been able to find the right person. He said, last night I was sitting in the lobby, had finished my newspaper after dinner, and was getting up out of that chair to go to my room. And he said, as I got up, there was a person that's seated across from me who was reading his newspaper, got up at the same time. And we struck up a conversation, introduced ourselves, and found out that we were that each of us was the regional representative of two competing pharmaceutical houses. We discovered that our territories overlap right here in Roanoke. And I said to this man, whose name was Ray Hess, I've been unsuccessful in finding just the right salesman for this territory. Would you by any chance happen to know who I might be able to find? He said, as a matter of fact, I do. He said, in this very hotel about 9 months ago, one of the guys that used to work for me came and made what he called his amends. He said it was one of the most interesting experiences of my life. He said, if you can find him, he's the guy for you. He can do it. He can handle his territory. And he said, I would take him back with my company, except we have a policy against him. Now, John Mosley, the next morning, which was that very morning, thought about calling the person who was in charge of the local pharmaceutical wholesale warehouse. He thought maybe he might know me. That's interesting that I had known that person, had not seen him for some years, but just the preceding week had bumped into him on the street, and we chatted for a few moments. He said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm working at Johnson McReynolds Chevrolet, which is right there. And I said, from the showroom floor, I can almost look into your office. I've been in your office in years past. I said, I can look right out and see you. So when John Mosley called this man and said, do you happen to know a guy by the name of Jack Boland? And he said, I do. And John said, you know where I can reach him? He said, as a matter of fact, I think I can see him on the showroom floor right there. Do you think these things are coincidences? The order of these things? Could this be what God meant when God said, before you have called, I've already answered. Before you've got a problem, I've already got the solution. But there's some things that you must do, some thoughts that you must change, some actions that you must take. This is what happens to a person who is involved in the spiritual life. This brings us to step 10, which suggests that we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. Now, it's important on occasion to take all of the steps again. Over and over again, I take the first 3 every morning, but the 4th step completely, the 5th and the 6th and the 7th. But rather than being able to continue to accumulate a past, I like to observe myself as I go along and to catch myself. If I'm living the life of the Spirit, it is required that I observe not only the mistakes that I make in my thinking so that I can correct my course, but the mistakes that I make with my voice and my vocabulary, my attitudes, and with other people. And when I'm wrong, promptly admit it. And the wrongs are not always outer wrongs, but they are wrongs that take place inside me. I have to know what's going on inside me, or I cannot correct it. If I do not know what's happening inside me, in time I'll be back to where I was, not up to where I want to be. Know thyself, Pythagoras said. The unexamined life is not worth living, Plato said. The unexamined, moment-to-moment awareness of what is happening to me. We, to some extent, by this time into these steps, will have developed God consciousness, a vital sixth sense, a sixth sense that will carry us forward into new dimensions of the life of the Spirit. Continue to take personal inventory, and when wrong, promptly admit it. Oh, how sweet. The ability to no longer think that you have made me the way I am. The ability to know that it does not matter what happens to me. It does not matter what's happening to me. The only thing that matters is my response to what is happening to me. I cannot change my outer world, but I can change my responses. And in the changing of my responses, invariably my outer world shifts and moves and changes in the most dramatic way. And if in a given moment, I was not able to catch myself and change myself, then to be able to admit that I was wrong and to see that I was wrong and promptly admit it to myself and to God and to the other persons who were involved. This is the life of the Spirit. There's no other life of the Spirit. There's no other. See, what we're talking about comes out of the Sermon on the Mount and the book of James, and goes back beyond that time into the Old Testament. Goes back to the beginning. It's how we are built. It comes back to our real self. This is the way our real self must function, the way our real self must think, feel, and to be. It's easy to let up on our spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We've all done it, haven't we? Things go so well that we think, gosh, I've got it made. But we don't have it made. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. A daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. The only thing that I have control over is the maintenance of my spiritual condition. If I maintain my spiritual condition, everything in my life will ultimately conform to that condition. That is the law that simply cannot be broken. To learn to carry the vision of God's will into my days and not my own will. So it's important to continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when these crop up, to ask God to remove them at once. To discuss it with someone else, a sponsor, with your accountability group. Then resolutely turn our thoughts over to the care of God. Your Simon's coming up. Take a deep breath. To make a list of all the persons you have harmed and become willing to make amends to them all, including your guardian. And then begin to go into action to make amends to them. Doing so, if it does not harm someone, being diligent and yet being totally honest with yourself, and watch, and I hope you will report to me some of the amazing things that will happen in your relationships with people. You will just blow them away. I promise you that you will. You will never be harmed in this process. You will think you will be. You will think they won't understand, and then maybe somewhere someone might not, but that's okay. Remember, this process is for you. It is not for them. They will be changed, but it is you who will be transformed. You don't get to this place unless you have experienced defeat and some tears and some pain, some anguish. Edwin Markham said, victory and defeat. Defeat may serve as well as victory to shake the soul and let the glory out. When the great oak is straining in the wind, the boughs drink in new beauty, and the trunk sends down a deeper root on the windward side. Only the soul that knows the mighty grief can know the mighty rapture. Sorrows come to stretch our spaces in the heart of joy. Sorrows have come so that they might go. And these steps have been designed to put you in the heart of God's own joy. And that's the way it really is.